Can I be honest? There's things that you deal with that, yeah, you've improved in it, but you haven't conquered it yet. This is something I have not conquered yet. I have not sit there and go, I need to write a book on this topic because I'm the expert. No, I am not only the pastor, I am a client too. I need God's help. I need God to fill me up and to give me God confidence that God is going to use us, all of us, to do great things. And that sometimes, how many of us are our own worst critic for anything? Like when your singing voice or your work or, how you're able to make money or how much you, whatever, that you're the worst critic that you hear yourself or try, if you want to be your worst critic, try to record yourself sounding smart, and just turn the camera on and then listen to yourself and go, oh man, it humbles me. So we are continuing this series, Water Walker, and I don't usually start the sermon with a quote, but I want to do a quote because I read this. The first thing I did when I was studying for this message was I read a quote, and it's by an author. I had to look him up to see who he really was because I just saw the name, Herman Melville. Have you ever heard of him? Author. How many of us know what he's famous for? What did he write? Moby Dick. Wow, you guys are so good. I had to look that up. And I claim to know books and that kind of thing. I just usually know the book, not the author. But he said something great. He or she, right? We who have never failed somewhere, that person cannot be great. Failure is the test of greatness. Well, I don't think that was in the book Moby Dick, but I think, I really needed to hear this. How many of us would agree with that at some point in your life, if you're going to do something great for God, you have to fail at some point in order to springboard towards it? Now, we all agree with that, but how many of us like to fail? See, there's a two-sided coin here, Lord. Like, I don't want to fail, but I want to do the things that, God, you call me to do. But no one, and I mean no one, gets the first thing in their life right. Okay? God calls you to do something. What's going to happen? You're going to flop and fail at some point. Even if God is with you, which He is, even if God is leading you, there are times when you, because you're human like I am, you will not do what you expect that you're supposed to do. And that's why I like this quote, because he who has never failed somewhere, that man cannot be great. Failure is a test of greatness. And I've read this week different people who are like the top in their field, whether it be sports or singing or acting or ministry or medical or teaching or whatever. And every single one of them, they always cited one thing, that before they got to where they're at, they failed at a million different things. I mean, I'm sure you heard different things and different, actually I was reading something in Dr. Seuss, the very first book that he wrote. It was Mulberry Street. I think that was the first. He sent that manuscript in to, I believe it was, don't quote me on this, but I think it was around 32 or 33 times to different publishers, and 33 times it got rejected before he received that, yes, we're going to accept your book. Imagine if you're Dr. Seuss and the first time, or the 15th time, you give up. Then what happens to Dr. Seuss? Well, I guess he's just a regular doctor. I don't know if he was, but you would not be an author. You would just stop and you would wonder, what would it be like if I was an author? What would it be like if I had Cat in the Hat? That kind of Hop on Pop, which was my personal favorite. I liked Hop on Pop. Anybody else like Hop on Pop? Remember that? I like that. But how many of us want to be mediocre at everything? I think maybe a little bit of us, we like, if I want to be the greatest at everything, that's going to take a lot of work. You're absolutely right. It's absolutely right. If I want to be the best basketball player, I should have started 20, 30 years ago, but I should have been out there playing every single day. I should have been practicing. I shouldn't have given up when I got cut from the team, because even Michael Jordan got cut from the high school team. So I could have been the next Michael Jordan. Who knows? More like Larry Bird. They used to call me Larry Bird because I could throw a three-pointer. Why are you laughing, Lyd? She's laughing. Because I could make a three-pointer, but I would miss the lay-in. I don't know why. Don't ask me why. I have proof somewhere. There's a video cassette, little cassette that went into our camera of me like easily putting a lay-in, and it went right off the hoop. I mean, that's a true story. Ask my brother. He's the one that made fun of me with that. So we all want to do things for God, but we don't want to fail. But here's right out the gate, I want to say, you cannot do anything great at anything in your life, not just with God, but anything, any field, without at first falling flat on your face, and you got to get up and you got to keep going. But most of us, myself included, when we fail at something, we're like, well, that's the sign that I'm not supposed to be doing that. I'm not meant to be doing that. God, you're showing me that I'm not supposed to be doing this because I'm not good enough at this. And then you might be the Dr. Seuss person who, man, you had to send it into the 34th time, and then they'll receive your manuscript. I mean, how many of us are on the 15th time in our life and we're ready to wash our hands of it and go, I don't want to do it anymore. And so I don't want to be like that. Imagine for just a minute, go back in time, and Hayden, he's getting too old too quick, you know what I mean? And when he was younger, we celebrated his toddling stage. Like he was like, you know, and what do you do when you see your kid for the first time walk? Don't you celebrate? Yay! And then he would walk around the coffee table, and then he fell flat on his butt, and his diaper patted his rear end, so there was cushion, but because he had natural cushion, but he also had the diaper. But what did you do? What did you do? I'll owe him for that one. Don't worry. But what would you do as a parent if your kid fell on his or her behind and you fell? Would you go, that's it, get to your room, you're grounded, you're done? No, you go, that's it, that's the step. You know that part of learning how to walk is to fall on your behind once or twice, and then you'll get the first step. It's like riding your bike. When I was a kid, took the training wheels off, and I was horrible when my dad was teaching me how to ride a bike. And I might confess that he might have got a little frustrated with me. Like, get up, right? But like any parent, we want if the kid falls off the bike or falls on his behind when he's walking, you don't call that a permanent failure. You say that little, quote, failure is a springboard to learning to do something new. Kids don't have the capacity to go, you know what, I just fell here. I don't think I'm meant to walk. So we don't have a almost 15-year-old crawling around the house. He actually learned how to walk. Congratulations. You did a good job. And he learned how to ride a bike, and he learned how to run, and he learned how to climb. But when you do anything in life, not just doing this, obvious stuff that you need to do, like walk, you need to be able to be okay with falling flat on your behind once in a while and say, you know what, this is the step to take before God is going to lead me to great things, what I guess we'll call great things that He's calling us to do. And so what did he do? When he was a young child, he would try and try again. Fall down, get up, and try again. Fall down, get up, try again. That's what you want to do. That's what you teach your kid to do. And they do that, and they're great. And they're content with it. But when you're an adult, there's something that's wired in your brain that says, I might fail at this, and I don't want to look like a fool. Because when you're a kid, I'm talking about a little kid, you don't have that ability. Little kids look foolish, right? They just look foolish. They have mashed potatoes all over their face, their nose, and they don't even care. And when I was a kid, we used to eat cake, and we ate it a lot, and there's a picture of my brother with cake all over his face, and he's smiling. Maybe you would want to do that when we were grown up, but when we're grown up, usually you're more have composure. You're just like, no, I don't want to have a picture taken with cake on my nose. But when you're an adult, sometimes we're afraid of failing. Sometimes we're afraid of falling. Sometimes we're afraid of that sinking feeling that we have in life when you're doing something great and then things don't work out as they're supposed to. And so what do? Instead of going forward, it causes you to just stop, and you tie yourself in the boat, and you're like, you cannot move me. You cannot move me, God. I'm staying here. You'll tie me down in ropes, and I'll stay in the boat. I'm not going to walk on water. See, Peter, look at Matthew 14. I know we've read this a few times, but I want to say right now that this is a personal sermon for me, and maybe for all of us. If you're afraid of failing, and your mind says, I know I might fail at this, so I'm just not going to try. Because what's the point? I don't want to look like a fool. I don't want to go out to everybody and say, guess what I'm going to do, and then it doesn't work out. Because how many of us like to look foolish? I don't. Anybody like to look foolish? Maybe in front of your family, but not in front of people that you respect, that you respect and honor your family, but you're not going to go to work and go, I feel like being foolish today. But with your family, you just don't care. You just look foolish. I always look foolish to my family. They always think I look, wow, that was pretty dumb. Why'd you do that, Joel? Well, just because. So look at Matthew chapter 14. We've read this over and over, but I wanted to always add a little line or two. It says this. It says, so Peter went over the side of the boat and he walked on the water toward Jesus. Now we talked about that. That's his high point. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified. And what did he do? He began to sink. Everybody say began to sink. He began to sink. When his eyes were not focused on Jesus, which we'll talk about that next week, specifically, keeping your eyes on Jesus. When he kept his focus on the storm, on his issue, on his problem, on his past, he began to sink. And he said, he was terrified. He began to sink. Save me, Lord. I like to hear, save me, Lord. That was more than likely what it sounded like, right? Like, save me, Lord. Right? But Jesus immediately, I had to say this again. Everybody say immediately. Immediately. This is huge. When you fail, when you fall, Jesus is there immediately. He's not waiting to go, are you getting the lesson yet? I'm keeping you under this water. It's kind of like with your dog. When you had to train your dog not to go duty on the carpet, you put the nose in the carpet, right? You put your nose in that carpet right there, young dog, right? Maybe it was just me that did that. I don't know. That's why, that's what, it's not like Jesus is doing that, putting our nose in the carpet where we made a mess. Immediately, he reached out and he grabbed him. But then he had a little sermonette from Jesus, personal to him. You have so little faith. Time out. Can we just say this? Can I say the obvious? How many of us think that the people in the boat need the sermon more than Peter? Come on. Am I the only one? I mean, I think that if I were Jesus, and I don't make a good Jesus, but if I was, I would like to go, Peter, A for effort, right? You did good. But those bozos over there, those clowns over there, they didn't do anything. Here, let me give you guys a little sermon here. But he doesn't do that. Because he knew Peter's potential. And he knew Peter had that ability to keep walking if he kept his focus on Jesus. But he said, you have so little faith. I've said that before in this sermon series. I don't like that. But who am I to question Jesus? But at the same time, I don't like that, Jesus. How many of us like that Jesus responded that way? Not me. He says, why did you doubt me? Why did you not trust that I am the one that can keep you afloat? If you feel like they're falling, I will be there. Why did you doubt? Why did you keep your eyes off of me? Why did you look at these waves? Why? Peter was a water toddler. His steps, I believe, were as uncertain as his faith. Because think about it, if he's out the boat and he has so much faith in God, I think that he's going to run towards Jesus. And he's going to go, right? But I guarantee you, he's going like this. Okay. One more? One more, Jesus? Okay, hold on. One more? Okay. And then he looks down and goes, uh-oh. And then he starts to sink. Why did you doubt me? Now, as a person who deals with chronic fear of failure, am I the only one? Does anyone have a fear of failure? Like I know a few of us, okay? How many of us we don't care if we fail. We don't care, we just do it anyway. Okay? You guys are the one that needs to be up here and say, you write the book. How do you live your life without that constant fear that it's not going to work out as you planned? Okay, my question, this is just for me if it's not for anybody else. Why is it that for some people failure is energizing while for others failure is paralyzing? Why is it that when some people fail, like say Michael Jordan, he did not use his high school coach, imagine being the high school coach that cut him, and then he didn't use that as an excuse to say, you know what, I don't think I'm cut out for basketball. I'm going to play some baseball. That was an inside joke if you know sports. Okay, he was not a good baseball player. But he actually went into North Carolina. He was a Tar Heel, correct me if I'm wrong. But imagine being cut by the high school team and you're a Tar Heel after that in college, and he's one of the greatest. I hate to say that, but he was one of the greatest. But why is it that people like him, he uses failure as a springboard to keep going? And why is it that some people, when you fail or you have that itch in your side, your spirit that maybe I'm going to fail, it's paralyzing. You go, I'm getting back in the boat. Just when the moment you start to sink a little bit, you're going back in the boat and you're tying yourself down. Why is that some people are like that? I thought about, we were practicing this yesterday, Hayden and Lydia were here, and I thought about a picture of What About Bob? Have you ever seen What About Bob? I mean, this guy has a fear of everything. He's afraid of himself, he's afraid of his own shadow, he's afraid of dust, he's afraid of people, he's afraid of, if you haven't seen What About Bob, it's an American classic, okay? It really is, okay? And it really is, it's just an amazing movie, but he goes, someone invites the daughter of this family, the doctor, anyway, long story short, the daughter of this doctor that he goes to says, hey, me and my friends are going sailing, you want to go sailing? He goes, oh, no. And he gets so nervous that he can't even hardly talk. He's like, sail? You want to sail? Yeah, I'll sail. I can sail. Yeah, we can do that. And then it shows him doing that right there. And they tied him in there. And I just noticed yesterday, for the very first time, that he's got help around his ankles and feet, just in case that jacket wasn't enough. And he goes, I'm sailing. And then he goes up to the little kid who doesn't know how to swim. He can't dive. And so he goes, do you sail? I sail. He's like an expert all of a sudden, right? But the reality is, I thought about that as I was practicing this yesterday, that a lot of us were so afraid of failing that if life were like a sailboat ride, we'll do it, but we want to make sure that we're safe. I mean, not only is the jacket enough, but you got to have the feet, you got to put the jackets around the ankles and feet, and then you got to be tied down by rope, because then he's ultimately safe. But we don't want to do anything because we're afraid that the sailboat's going to sink. So most of us, we stay on the edge way over there. That's Lake Winnipesaukee, by the way, which I like that name. That's just pretty cool. But you're like, Joel, you've seen that one too many times. Probably. I just like it a lot. But we all deal with failure, and no one likes it. But for some people, failure is a motivation to keep going. But for some people, maybe myself included, failure is a reason to stay in the boat. Failure, and even having a little idea in your brain that goes into your ear, and it just plants itself in the brain, and it says, if you do this, you probably will look foolish. So then you go, you know what? I'm staying in the boat. And at least Bob Wiley, even here, at least he was in the boat. At least he was getting ready to do something he's afraid of. At least, even though he looks foolish right there, at least he did something that was outside of his comfort zone. Now, I was actually reading this week, and this psychologist, he cited his name is Daniel Goleman, he cited many studies that found that the performers in fields from athletics to nurses to medicine, all medicine, science, music, people who invented things, people who like if the person that invented the telephone and the light bulb and all sorts of, they changed the world around by their idea. Every single one of them had one thing in common, because they all looked different. They all sounded different. Maybe their politics were different. Maybe some of them believe in God, some of them didn't believe in God. One thing was in common, was that they all made it their number one goal to learn from failure. Every single one of them. None of them did something the first time great. None of them, if I wanted to become like Hulk Hogan in the WWF, WWE, whatever you call it, and I'm not just going to go wrestle against Andre the Giant for the very first time. I'm ready to hear, I've got to work on that. Of course, my arms aren't even that big. His arms were that. And so I got a long way to go. So I got to learn that at some point I'm going to fail before I get to that point. At some point, I've got to understand that when you fail at something, that is not the end. That is just the beginning. So, okay, if I was writing my own story, I'd say in the beginning, Joel failed at yada, yada, yada. And if the story continued, as it goes, then Joel decided to improve on that, and then he failed again. And then, Joel decided to try it again, and finally, he did something great for God. Instead of, you know what, I failed the first time, I don't think I'm ready for this. I don't think I'm all cut out for this ministry thing. I don't think I'm cut out for this people thing, like loving people. I am just not ready for that, God. You have to understand that anyone that did something great in their life, they always learned that they're going to learn from failure. And it was a springboard to doing whatever, like Michael Jordan or scientists or people in medicine. It was always, they had to try it, fail, and try it again, fail, and try again. And maybe they failed 70 times. I don't know. But I want to study today a season in the life of one of the most faith-filled, adventurous men who ever lived. And he was also a huge, major failure. His name was King David. I love King David for one fact, that every single person on planet Earth, whether you are a Christian or not, you know who David was. You have heard his name at some point. Okay? Jesus is known as the son of David. Why is that? Because David was this king that God used, and everyone goes, from David, there's going to be a Messiah. From David, there's going to be a lineage, and it's ultimately get to Jesus. King David was a man who did many great things for God. He was anointed as the next king by Samuel. The problem is King Saul was already the king. There was a guy in the way. But when he was young, David was anointed to be king. And then when he was a little bit older than that, he killed the biggest giant that he ever had, that was biggest enemy to the people, and he killed Goliath. And he did all this stuff. And then King Saul, who ended up being his enemy, but he chose him to be the top guy in the military. He was a warrior. And not only that, but David was a great musician. David would have been on our worship team. He would have been like, hey, I'm here just to help and that kind of thing. And he was a musician because when he played the harp, when he played music, like everybody their spirit was calm. And so God used him major, but then all of a sudden it seemed like overnight. You ever experience overnight failure? Like all of a sudden the whole thing just shifts. Something shifted in the atmosphere here. He lost multiple things. First of all, he lost his job. Being the top warrior and being that musician. King Saul was so jealous of David because David was so popular with the people in the military. They would sing a song about him. Remember the song? Okay, in a nutshell, basically, King Saul, he's fine. He does great things. But David, you are wonderful. You've killed more people than that guy over there. King Saul's like, I am ready to kill you. He's even throwing spears at David. So he loses his job. And then he lost his wife Michal, which was King Saul's daughter. And Michal went back with King Saul and his father and her father. She did end up coming back later in the book of 2 Samuel, but he didn't know that at the time. So he loses his job almost overnight. Then he loses his wife. You know, he's like, what am I going to do? Then he returns to his mentor Samuel. He goes, I need some encouragement. How many of you guys seek out people who are encouraging and you want to go back to them? Imagine going back to that number one encourager and he's very, very old and he dies. So you lose your job, you lose your wife, you lose your mentor. Your top encourager's gone. Then you go, you know what? I'm going to my best friend, I'm going to Jonathan. And I need you to go with me. I'm alone. I'm running for my life. And your father, Jonathan, he's going to kill me. And Jonathan, for some odd reason, decides, I love you, David, and but I have to stick by it. So he chooses not to go. And so finally, he's literally on the run and literally alone. And then David has a weird idea. He's going to act crazy. Maybe you've read the story in 1 Samuel chapter 21. 1 Samuel chapter 21, look at these. David heard these comments, and you got to read the rest of the story. It's kind of an interesting story. He's on the run. He heard these comments, and he was very afraid of what King Achish of Gath might do to him. So he's on the run by different kings, and people are chasing him, and he feels like he's alone. And he goes, I want to go to this place, and maybe they'll lock me up, and I'll be safe. So he pretended to be insane, scratching at the doors. I just thought that was it. You ever read the Bible and you imagine it in your brain? Like, he's like causing himself to foam at the mouth. Okay, he's scratching on the doors, and he's drooling down his beard. Let's be honest, he's not just drooling, he's foaming at the mouth like I am right now, because I'm thirsty. And then, finally, King Achish, he said to his men, must you bring me a madman? He's a very convincing actor. Right? Like, wow, this is a good actor. Okay? King David, he's so afraid for his life that he goes, if I go to this guy, and I'm more fearful now than I ever have been, maybe they'll lock me up and they'll say, we need to keep him. Let's lock him in. And it doesn't even work. So he actually is alone yet again. And this is where the story is more relatable. No, we've never lived in a cave, unless maybe you have. Anybody live in a cave for a little bit? I mean, it might be cooler. When we went to a silver mine over in Kellogg or whatever it was a good 30, 40 degrees cooler in that cave. Wallace, Idaho, okay? And I remember it being hot that day, and we go into that cave, and we were cold. It was awesome. So maybe it would be a smart thing, David. But he runs, and this is chapter 22, verse 1, the first part of it. So David left Gath because they wouldn't keep him. They're like, no, we're not keeping you. You're crazy. You're drooling and foaming at the mouth. And he escaped to the cave of Adullam, or Adullam. I don't know how to say. How do you guys say that? Adullam? How do you guys say that? Adullam. Okay, it was a dull experience for him. He was in the cave. He once had wealth. He had power. He had fame. He had talents. He had a job. He had a ministry. He had all sorts of different stuff. He had a future. And now, he doesn't have a future, it seems like. How long am I going to have to stay in this cave, hiding from Saul? Just think about it. Saul is, at every waking moment, he is trying to kill King David. Not even King David yet. So from this point on, I want to call this the cave of failure. Maybe he didn't know it yet, but he's going to feel it really quick, that how high the mighty man of God can easily fall. And he's in a low moment in his life. And he used to be in charge of the military. He was in charge of the music. He was all in charge of that. And then finally, he looks around this cave and he has no one. He's impacting no one. And maybe that's you. You're in a cave. You thought you were going to do great things. You thought you were going to have a great family. You thought that you were going to boldly go where no one has gone before. You thought if life was like if you're like an astronaut, you're like, I thought I was going to go to the moon. But instead of going to the moon and being an astronaut, I was content with just sitting in my car and pretending I'm going to the moon. Like, that is how your life has been. You thought you're going to do great things. And here you are sitting way down here in the cave of failure going, I should be on the moon by now. I should be walking on water now. I should be doing great things for God. Maybe it's because of the foolish choices you made that you're in your cave. Or maybe it's someone did something to you and it's beyond your control. Maybe it's a mixture of both. Because there's things that I've done in my life, it's the reason why I failed. And then there's things that have gone against me that I didn't do anything to deserve it, but that's just how things go. And so sometimes I'm in that cave of failure. Maybe for some of us, maybe not here, maybe you're watching online, you lost a job, or you can't find a job, or you have financial pressure. You ever felt that financial pressure? Like, you don't know when the bubble's going to burst? Like, how am I going to survive? Maybe your family life isn't what it was cracked up to be. Maybe you had a friend and you lost that friend. Maybe you had a really close relative that either left you, like, hey, I don't want to be with you anymore, or they died, and you feel utterly alone. Maybe you're in the cave of failure. I want to give you some good news, because you don't plan a trip to the cave of failure. Believe me. You'd rather not go there. You'd rather learn the easy way to do great things for God. You don't want to learn. Nobody wants to learn the hard way. But there's something that is great, that the cave is where God does some of his best work in molding and shaping our lives. When you feel at your worst, that's when God, you have an open, for most of us, maybe not all of us, but most of us, if we can understand this and remember this principle, that when you're at a cave of failure in your life and you feel like you're at your worst, God has the ability, if you are open to it, where he can mold you and shape you. Because think about it, when everything's going great and there's never a problem, you think that you're exactly where God has you. Look at me, I'm healthy, I'm holy, I'm holier than thou. Maybe you'll say that, like not literally, but in your heart. I'm walking on water, I don't really need anything else. But when you start sinking, Lord, save me, and then you're like, and then all of a sudden you get out, and then Jesus lays you on the beach a little bit, and you're like a beached whale, and then you're spitting the water out, and you're like, help me, Lord. And it's at that moment when you feel like you're the lowest that you've ever been, where you go, you know what? I am an open book right now. Lord, help me. Lord, mold me. Lord, shape me. And this is when David learned a lot in his own personal life. How in the world are you supposed to fail and still move on? He learned it extreme during that time. So look at chapter 22 of 1 Samuel, verse 2. This is great because all of a sudden he has this little ministry that begins, that it's out of his control. He doesn't even know what to do, really. People start showing up. But look at the crowd of people that show up. He's in the cave. Then others began coming. He's alone. Then some family members came. Then others began. Men who were in trouble or in debt or who were just discontented, until David was the captain of about 400 men. Think about this group of people. This is not the Michael Jordans of the NBA. This is the Joel Bremers of the NBA. Like if there was a top Michael Jordan, the whole Seattle Supersonics of the 90s right there next to that, they were pretty good. And then there's me way on the bottom. This is who's hanging out with them. This is the ragtag group of people who is showing up and saying, David, you need to help us. I would even call them losers. Is that okay to say in church? Like these are not the top of the top. This is not the cream of the crop. This is the people who are miserable, they're in debt, they're in trouble. And maybe they're not just in trouble, they're just discontented. I don't like my life. I don't like my family. I don't like my job. I don't like anything. David, let's hang out. And they decide to move to a town called Ziklag, which I love that. I want to move there someday because I just love that town name, Ziklag. And he says, we're 400 of us, we're going to live in that town and we're going to get married. Some of us are going to get married. We're going to get jobs. We're going to do things that are great. And he becomes this minister of this ragtag group who they want to do good things, but then something crazy happens. Because think about it, when you decide to do something good for God, even when you're walking on water, don't fear something that will happen. You'll start to have that sinking feeling. Like, I feel like I'm shorter now than I used to be. Wait a minute. Oh, I'm going down in the water because something crazy happens. And it's actually in chapter 30. You got to read the whole story to get the whole story. But chapter 30, 1 Samuel, verse 1 through 4. 3 days later, when David and his men arrived home at the town of Ziklag, they found, think about it, you're going home and you're like, yay, let's go home and have some ice cream. And they found out that the Amalekites had made a raid into the Negev and the Ziklag. They had crushed Ziklag and they burned it to the ground. No more homes. No more businesses. Everything's burnt to a crisp. And they had carried off the women and children and everyone else, but without killing anyone. So they're not killing anyone. They're just keeping them for leverage. We're going to kidnap your wives, your children, the guy who's in charge of the grocery store. We're going to take everyone to keep you, that you are way under us. We're going to show you how powerful we really are. And then when David and his men saw the ruins and they realized what had happened to their families, they wept until they could weep no more. How many of us have ever wept until we could weep no more? I think we all have. Because weeping can be exhausting. You know, you're doing great and something weird happens in your life and then you lay down in bed and you go, what just happened? Or you're driving in your car and you go, what just happened? How did this just happen? What? Am I the only one that's dealt with that? Like you're driving, or you're in your house, or you're eating a bowl of ice cream, and you're sitting there going, man, I thought things were going to be different than this. I thought Ziklag was the place to be, man. No, if you're being David, you're like, no, I'm not a king right now. But man, I am in charge of these 400 ragtag group, and they're looking to me, and this is a ministry, and all of a sudden we get home from some battle, and we go, how come everything's gone? We can't, man, I was going to pull my car into the garage, and now the garage isn't even there. My car's not even there, because cars aren't even invented yet, right? That was a stupid joke, but, this is a long time ago, right? But they wept, and they wept, and they wept until they could cry and weep no more. Look at verse 6. I'm going to read this one, the New King James Version. I like how it says it. Now David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him. Pause. One thing I didn't mention was that not only did he lose all these people and lost all the businesses and homes, and now the people are turning on him, blaming him for their problems. They wanted to stone him because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and his daughters. But David, everybody say, but David. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. There's much going on here. Everything's bad. Everything's miserable. People want to kill you. I've lost my wife. I've lost my house. I've lost everything. I've lost my job. I've lost everything. I feel like a failure. I feel like I'm walking on water one minute, and now I'm on the bottom of the ocean the next minute. I don't know what I'm going to do. But David, he strengthened himself in the Lord his God. I would like to figure out that secret. How to have that ability. When you feel your worst, your spirit is soaring. When your body feels like your back hurts, or you feel like you can't hardly walk, you don't feel like you used to be, you're not as young as you used to be. None of us are as young as we used to be. And you go, man, if I could just turn back the clock 20 years, if I could just do something different. But David, no matter what he dealt with, he learned that secret of strengthening himself in the Lord his God. I would like to know the secret of that. Divine encouragement, I'd like to call it. You can call it, strengthening yourself in the Lord. I like to call it divine encouragement. If you need a dose of encouragement, you go to God. When you need a dose of joy, you go to God. You can get all sorts of pills you want. You can get all sorts of drinks you want. You can get all sorts of entertainment or any kind of experience, but those are nothing compared to when you go to the Lord your God for your fix, if you will. Right? If you need that little encouragement, boom! You go and you strengthen yourself in the Lord your God. God has given you that ability. It is not anyone else's job for you to strengthen yourself in the Lord. It's not your pastor's job. It's not some Bible teacher. It's not some video on YouTube. It is you. You are in charge of strengthening yourself in the Lord. That's the secret to David's success, by the way. That's why David couldn't give up. Because if I were David, I'd have given up. The cave was bad enough. But when is he going to become king? Like when? Come on, Lord. And then Psalm 142. Psalm 142. I love this because Psalm 142, if you read it, he's reminding the reader that he's reminding us that he had a season of being in the cave. If you read Psalm 142, it will say that. This is written to remember his cave dwelling. Maybe it doesn't say that exactly, but that's how I interpreted it. Okay? And he says this in verse 1 and 2 of Psalm 142. I cry out to the Lord. I plead for the Lord's mercy. I pour out say complaints. Everybody say complaints. Complaints. I pour out my complaints before God, and I tell him all my troubles. How many of us are good at complaining? How many of us know how to do that? That's your spiritual gift, right? Okay, maybe not. Okay? If you know how to complain, you're one up on the people who don't know how to complain, who are content with how everything go. If you know how to complain, you know how to complain to God. And I've known this since day one of being a Christian, and this has really freed me, that it's almost like God encourages us to be real and honest with him and just pouring out from the gut. This is what I'm dealing with, Lord. So what's the secret of David's success? It's to strengthen himself in the Lord. What does that look like specifically? The very first thing you do is you're real and you're honest about your failures. And you're real and honest about your feelings about it. You don't keep it inside. See, some people are very good at keeping a good face, and everybody has a good smile, but inside they're broken. But some people, they're like, hey, I'm so honest, I'm just going to pour it out before God. Blech. See, the cave of failure is the most wonderful place to find that you are loved by God. Think about it. When you feel your worst and when you feel like you failed, or maybe you did fail, and you figure out that God loves you despite all that, where else can you go to avoid God's love? I wrote something down here. I want to put it on here. This might be your takeaway. But God loves us, not our accomplishments. Does he like our accomplishments? Does he want us to accomplish things? Of course. But does he love you based on your performance? No. Is he like this boss that, he's a CEO of a company, and if you don't accomplish exactly what they want, you're done. You're fired. That's not how God operates. He loves you, not your accomplishments. You might feel like you haven't accomplished anything for God, but you don't realize that you have. You don't realize that even when David was in the cave and a small group of people showed up, that was major to this people. That was life-altering to those people. He wasn't a king, but at that moment, he was a leader of a ragtag group. And at that point, he was like, you know what? That's enough. Psalm 142:5, we just read the first couple verses, but it says, then I pray to you, O Lord. I say, you are my place of refuge. You are all I really want in life. In other words, Lord, I'm in this cave right now, but what the real cave is? The place of safety? It's you, God. This cave is only a physical reminder of what's going on in my heart. You protect me, Lord. You save me. You heal me. You are all I really want in life. Now, I want to close with something, with one of my favorite presidents. Every time in my life that I've ever wanted to read about failure, there's one name that comes up in my life, and that's Abraham Lincoln. Now, before you say anything, you might go, well, if he gave up on anything, I was going to say he'd still be alive. That's not true, but he would have never died. He never would have been shot. We don't know that. But if he would have given up the first time, the 20th time, if he would have given up, he never would become the 16th president of the United States and help free the slaves. He never would have been there if he would have chosen to throw in the towel. Because Abraham Lincoln knew something that we all need to learn. When you fail, you need to be proactive. You need to keep going. Some of us, when we fail, we're like Bob Wiley in that picture. We're like locked up in our own little world. And we will refuse to do it. We need to be more like Abraham Lincoln. When things happen in your life that are not how you intended, you learn from it and you go. Like, for example, in 1832, he lost his job and he was defeated for state legislator. 1833, the next year, failed in his business. He tried business, failed at that. Now, there were some good things. 1834, he was elected to the Illinois state legislature finally. But in 1835, he wasn't married, but he had a girlfriend that he had every intention of marrying, and she died. In 1836, he had a nervous breakdown. Did you know both Abraham Lincoln and his future wife, they had nervous breakdown after nervous breakdown after nervous breakdown? They weren't okay up here all the time. Okay, but it started then. But at the same time, think about this. The same year he had a nervous breakdown, people would assume that he'd kill himself, commit suicide. He was reelected to Illinois state legislator, and he received his license to practice law in Illinois state courts. 1838, he was reelected to the Illinois House, but he was defeated for the Speaker of the House. Like, he wanted to be in charge of the Illinois Senate. Okay, 1840, he actually was reelected to Illinois state legislator. Things were good. So it sounds good. In 1843, he's defeated for nomination for Congress. Big trombone defeat. Wah, 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 wah. Like that's what he was. And then in 1846, he was elected to Congress. Now, everything's good up to this point. There's bad, there's good, there's bad. Now listen to this string of defeats. Year after year after year after year. 1848, lost free nomination, done. 1849, he was rejected for the land officer in Illinois. 1854, he was defeated for U.S. Senate. 1856, he was defeated for nomination for vice president. 1858, he was again defeated for U.S. Senate. 1860, does anybody know what happened in 1860? He was elected to be president. Now, granted, he died 5 years later, okay? But from 1860 to 1865, we would all agree. Now, the Civil War wasn't good, but at the same time, that it was the beginning of freeing the slaves, okay? Now, none of us would argue, I don't think, with the fact that God used a guy like that to do stuff like that. But what if in 1832 or 1833, after all this few things happened, I'm not cut out for this public life. Or in 1858, or 1857, 1856, he was defeated for the nomination of vice president. He's like, I really am not cut out for this. I'm going back to the law office. He would have not done what God meant for him to do. So why did I choose him? Because I don't know about you. I would have given up after the third thing that I failed at. Maybe the first thing. I don't know. Your sweetheart dies. That's an excuse to take 5 years off, in my opinion. Right? I mean, come on. But he just decides to keep going. So what does God have for you? He has a lot for you. But you're going to have to choose and risk failure. You're going to walk on water, but you're going to risk that at some point, maybe I might have a sinking feeling. You just need to keep going and know who's the one that keeps you afloat, who keeps you going, who keeps you walking on that water. It's not you, it's God. Let's take a moment and pray. Lord, we just praise you. We thank you. Lord, and I pray that each one of us, no matter what situation, what place, what we find ourselves in, that we're not stuck in the boat forever. And that we're not tied down in the boat and we're stuck there. God, I pray that you'd free us, that we are free to do what you called us to do. And even because we live in a sinful world and because we're human, there are times when we do fail. But I believe with all my heart that you do most of the molding and shaping of our lives when we feel like we are at our worst. And if we feel like we're in the cave of failure, God, that is not the end. That was only the beginning. Just like Abraham Lincoln, Lord, the failure was not the end. It was only the beginning of the things that you used him to accomplish many great things in this country. And I thank you that you can do the same thing in us. And we pray that we would have that ability to strengthen ourselves in the Lord when we feel really, really, really rotten. And I praise you and thank you. And I ask for blessing on each one of us here as we go. Protect us from the heat and keep us smart about that. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. God.